The Austrian Grand Prix starts on Friday. Ferrari is bringing an engine upgrade. You already know that. Every outlet covering Formula One this week has reported it. The ADUO tokens, the combustion chamber changes, the shell fuel, the intercooler temperature rising from 100 to 115 degrees. The broad outline has been covered. What has not been covered properly is the detail underneath it. Why this specific engine, built around this specific philosophy, needs this specific upgrade at this specific moment. The answer connects decisions Ferrari made before the season started, a rule change the FIA introduced mid-season that invalidated one of those decisions, an exhaust device that is costing Ferrari 13 horsepower every single lap, and a total power deficit to Mercedes that sits somewhere between 40 and 45 horsepower, a gap that the Austria upgrade addresses only partially, by design, with the larger intervention still months away. Austria is the first chapter. It is not the complete book. Understanding why requires going back further than most coverage has gone, not to Barcelona, not to the ADUO leak in Monaco, back to the fundamental engineering trade-off Ferrari committed to before pre-season testing had even begun, and which the 2026 season has spent 7 races either validating or exposing, depending on which corner of the car you are looking at. Under the 2026 power unit regulations, the MGU-H, the motor generator unit that connected the turbocharger to the electrical system in previous hybrid eras, is gone. Without MGU-H, turbocharger spool-up relies on exhaust energy alone, without electrical assistance. That change made the turbocharger selection decision more consequential than it had been for over a decade. A larger turbocharger moves more air at high RPM, produces more peak horsepower, and generates more top-end power on long straights. A smaller turbocharger spools faster, reaches full boost almost immediately off a slow corner, and produces sharper acceleration from standing starts and low-speed corners, at the cost of less peak airflow and lower maximum horsepower at the top end. Mercedes, by all accounts, chose the larger turbocharger. Higher peak power, more top-end speed, willing to live with slightly longer spool-up time in exchange for straight-line dominance. Ferrari chose the smaller turbocharger, faster spool, more explosive acceleration from standing starts and slow corners, trading peak horsepower for the kind of launch and traction performance that wins races in the opening sector of almost any circuit. That trade made complete sense at the time. Standing starts in Formula One are a meaningful percentage of the race performance picture. A car that loses 3 positions on the straight can still recover them through the corners. A car that loses 3 positions at the standing start faces a completely different challenge: dirty air, compromised strategy, lost points in the first 30 seconds of the race. Ferrari's engineers understood this and made a deliberate, data-driven call. Then the FIA introduced a new pre-start procedure mid-season, citing safety concerns that had emerged during testing. The specific nature of the procedure change neutralized a significant portion of the standing start advantage Ferrari had built its turbocharger selection around. The straight-line penalty remained. The advantage it was supposed to compensate for had been reduced. Ferrari's turbocharger trade-off, rational at the point of decision, had been partially invalidated by a regulatory intervention the team could not have predicted. The second ADUO upgrade, the one arriving at Monza rather than Austria, is expected to address the turbocharger directly, potentially introducing a larger specification to recover the peak horsepower lost with the current smaller unit. Austria is the combustion chamber and fuel step. Monza is where the turbo gets fixed. Before the power gap between Ferrari and Mercedes can be understood, it is necessary to account for something most coverage of the Austria engine upgrade has not mentioned. Ferrari is deliberately losing 13 horsepower every lap on the current SF26, not as a side effect of poor engineering, not as an unavoidable consequence of the hot engine architecture. As a calculated performance trade-off built into the car from the first drawing, the FTM device, Ferrari's exhaust-blocking fin mounted behind the diffuser, generates rear downforce by using the car's exhaust gases to energize the airflow over the diffuser and toward the rear wing. The technical principle is well established, and the device has given Ferrari measurable aerodynamic advantage at every circuit of the 2026 season. But creating back pressure in the exhaust system, which is exactly what an exhaust-blocking device does, reduces the engine's ability to expel waste gases efficiently. That back pressure cost Ferrari approximately 13 brake horsepower from their power unit output. 13 horsepower is not a rounding error. At a circuit with the speed trap characteristics of the Red Bull Ring, 13 horsepower is measurable in the timing data. It shows up in straight-line comparisons. It contributes to the gap that Ferrari drivers feel every time they reach a long straight and the Mercedes pulls away, despite the Ferrari being faster through every corner. Ferrari made the judgment that the aerodynamic gain from the FTM device was worth more than the 13 horsepower it cost. Given that Hamilton was 4/10 faster than Russell through Barcelona's middle sector, arguably the most aerodynamically demanding stretch of any circuit on the current calendar, that judgment appears to have been correct. The aerodynamic value of the rear downforce the device generates has outweighed the power loss it creates. That calculation remains in place for Austria. Ferrari is not removing the FTM device to recover the 13 horsepower. The aerodynamic package that produced Barcelona's result is traveling to Spielberg unchanged. The engine upgrade arriving this weekend is attempting to add horsepower on top of a baseline that is already voluntarily 13 horsepower lighter than it could otherwise be. That context makes the Austria engine step more significant than its raw numbers suggest, because every horsepower recovered through the ADUO upgrade arrives as a net addition rather than a partial recovery of an existing deficit. Subscribe to F1 Perspective, the detail that changes how you read the lap time. Here is the number that contextualizes everything else about the Austria upgrade. Ferrari's total power deficit to the Mercedes power unit is estimated at between 40 and 45 horsepower. That figure comes from multiple Italian sources with direct access to Ferrari's engine program, and it is consistent with what Fred Vasseur has acknowledged publicly, describing the gap to Mercedes as worth approximately 0.8 seconds per lap, which aligns with the horsepower estimate when circuit characteristics are factored in. The Austria upgrade is targeting 4 to 5 horsepower from the mechanical changes to the engine's combustion chamber and turbocharger internals, plus 2 to 3 additional horsepower from the Shell fuel formulation developed specifically for the new operating conditions. Combined estimate 6 to 8 horsepower. Against a 40 to 45 horsepower deficit, 6 to 8 horsepower is a starting point rather than a solution. Ferrari's engineers have been explicit about this. The Austria step is described internally as the validation phase, the first opportunity to confirm that the hot engine concept performs as expected when pushed to its new operating ceiling, that the Shell fuel chemistry behaves as the Hamburg laboratory predicted under real race conditions, and that the combination of mechanical and chemical changes integrates reliably across a full Grand Prix distance without compromising the power unit's durability. The second, more substantial step follows at Monza in September, when Ferrari will introduce the fourth engine of the season alongside the second ADUO token. That step is expected to address the turbocharger, the component whose size selection Ferrari is now reconsidering in light of the FIA's changed start procedure, and to deliver the larger portion of the combined 30 horsepower that the two-phase program is targeting. Even 30 horsepower against a 40 to 45 horsepower deficit means Ferrari arrives at the end of the season closer to Mercedes, but still not at parity. That residual gap is why the championship picture depends not just on Ferrari closing the engine deficit, but on the chassis advantage, the tyre management innovation, and Hamilton's own ability to convert imperfect cars into results, all of which Barcelona demonstrated in abundance. Drop a comment. Do you think 2 phases are enough for Ferrari to close the gap to Mercedes? Austria is not simply the next race. For Ferrari's engine program, it is the first real-world data point on a development philosophy that has been running in theory since before the season started. 3 long straights, a short lap, minimal opportunity for aerodynamic cleverness to compensate for a power deficit. If the 6 to 8 horsepower gain worked as intended, Friday's speed trap shows it directly. Barcelona muddied the picture. Aerodynamic and engine changes arriving together made separation impossible. Austria removes that ambiguity. The chassis is the same one that won in Spain. Any speed trap improvement belongs to the engine and fuel alone. There is also a reliability test that only 71 race laps can answer. Running an intercooler above 115 degrees Celsius stresses every component in Ferrari's compact cooling architecture harder than anything the season has produced so far. If both engines finish cleanly, the step is validated. If one does not, Spielberg's failure data becomes the most important diagnostic information Ferrari's program has seen all year. Either outcome tells Ferrari something a dynamometer cannot. The Austria engine upgrade is not a single event. It is the first confirmation point in a program built around deliberate trade-offs, a smaller turbocharger that lost its advantage when the FIA changed the start procedure mid-season, an exhaust device generating critical downforce while voluntarily costing 13 horsepower every lap, and a hot engine architecture running at temperatures no conventional fuel can handle. That is why Shell spent months building one that can. A power deficit of 40 to 45 horsepower. 2 ADUO phases targeting 30 of it. A residual gap that the chassis and Hamilton will have to cover. None of these are mistakes in isolation. Every compromise exists in service of a car that was 4/10 faster than the championship leader through every corner at Barcelona. Austria on Friday starts answering the question that has been building since pre-season testing. Not just how much horsepower Ferrari gained, but whether the complete package adds up to something that makes the 41-point gap to Antonelli look like a problem rather than a given.